All right, good morning, everybody. This morning we have Ken Baker, who is the executive presbyter, is that right? Executive presbyter of San Fernando Presbytery, and he's here to share with us. So it's a really privilege to have him here with us. So if you could welcome Ken.
Hey, thank you very much. Great to be with you. Why don't we start with a word of prayer? We'll get going. Lord, thanks for these folks who are here, whose call and claim you placed on their lives. Thanks for the opportunity to visit with them a little bit and learn about what they're seeing for the future of your church and how the rest of us can be more responsive, not just to them, but especially to what you, through the Holy Spirit, are doing. So thanks for this opportunity. In Christ's name. Amen. Amen. Well, it is good to be with you. And I want to just explore a topic with you today and start back with a meeting that took place at our recent General Assembly. Shannon will remember this meeting because she was in the room at the same time. We had a group of folks from the 1001 New Worshiping Community Program that our denomination sponsors, and they had a little get-together during the week of GA. Sorry this isn't a better picture. They provided the meeting room probably in the whole hotel that was the smallest with the dingiest light. But nevertheless, here's Vera White. Vera runs the 1001 program out of Louisville and Pittsburgh. And this young man by the name of Michael, and Shannon, you'll remember Michael, was introduced apparently during the week of GA. Vera was walking down the street between the convention center and the hotel, and she hears this voice behind her on the sidewalk saying, "Pardon me, are you the 1001 New Worshiping Communities lady?" And turned around, and there was Michael. And she said, well, as a matter of fact, I am. Well, what can I do for you? And he said, well, you wouldn't know somebody who could tell me how to start one of these new worshiping communities, would you? And she said, well, that would be me. And so they got to talking. And she introduced Michael during this meeting. It was a high energy time. It was really great to see his enthusiasm, his commitment to Christ's ministry. She happened to mention, she said, I asked Michael if he had a name for this new worshiping community he wanted to start. He said, yeah, I want to call it the Red Zone. I said, why is that? Well, so many Christians spend most of their time in the green zone where life is safe. I want to gather a group of people who are willing to go into the red zone where life is risky. And we were just thrilled to get a chance to identify Michael a little bit. I caught up with him later on during the week, and it was just really neat to see somebody like him, and today to meet folks like you who are thinking about considering, maybe already even started on the process of gathering a new worshiping community. Well, that was kind of the highlight for me of that whole week. And I got back home, and we've been in touch with a young man who's been doing a new worshiping community in one of the suburban towns around LA. Nick's been working with him, and I and several others have been trying to support him. But there's been a big difference between the time that he was as enthusiastic as Michael was here and the circumstances of today. Our young friend there, I think, has been doing an excellent job. He's an immigrant to this country. He's had gathered a group of folks who are maybe about 40 to 50. They meet on Saturday evenings, and I think they've done a great job. He's made some mistakes, just like any of us would, but generally it's been a ministry with real credibility, I think. But there have been some outside factors in that circumstance that have developed that have really left him discouraged and frustrated and questioning his sense of call. And the last I talked to somebody who had a chance to visit with him, they said he and the leadership team were pretty much going to throw in the towel at the end of the summer or early fall. They were gonna give up their dream to have a church, and I don't know. I've been bothered by that and praying for these folks since then. And yet we all know that kind of thing happens. Whatever your goal is, whatever your vision is in life, there are circumstances where things just don't go the way you hope. And you begin at times, at least if you're like most of us, to question how you got going on that direction, on that path in your life. In this case, I think our young friend out there, I think the problems he's run into are not of his own making. And don't let me get started on who I think made them. But anyway. There are these circumstances which you and I just can't control. The context, if you will. About 10 or 12 years ago, there was a study by Harvard Business School, and they analyzed people who had been very successful CEOs at companies, real high flyers, who then after a stint at a certain corporation that everybody in the business community acknowledged had been very successful, whatever that means in that context, they switched to another company or a company in another industry. And virtually everybody who knew them or knew of them assumed that they would be as big a success at the second place as they were at the first. But then they failed, sometimes very publicly, embarrassingly so for some of them. And so the students at Harvard Business School studied what had happened, the circumstances between in these people's lives and their work, between the first place, the second place, and what they concluded was that the context of their situations made far more difference than they or other people recognized. They had kind of made the typical American assumption that the individual was the key factor. And in fact, in a number of these cases, the individual who was the identified leader probably wasn't the key factor. They had found themselves, for whatever reason, in this context that was so advantageous, that provided everything they needed to really deliver their peak performance. And then they switched to another place, and that context just wasn't there. And they didn't do nearly as well as they or others had thought they would. Reminded me of a conversation I had a long time ago with Tom Gillespie. Tom was the president of Princeton Seminary for quite a number of years, but before Tom went to the seminary, he was a pastor in the Bay Area at a very prestigious church, and before that, he was a church planter down here in Southern California. And Tom once told me that when he started the First Presbyterian Church of Garden Grove, every Sunday when they opened the doors, more and more people crowded in, bigger and bigger crowd. And Tom said, I thought it was because I was such a great preacher. I thought maybe it had something to do with the fact that I was such a terrific New Testament scholar, and people were really getting fed and everything. And then I took this church in the Bay Area, and I realized that none of the stuff that I thought would work really worked. Now, Tom wasn't a failure at that church in the Bay Area, but he realized that he'd made some really unfounded assumptions. And what he came to realize was that he had started a church in the best year in American history to plant a church, 1954. And in 1954, he had started a church in the best place in America to start a church, which was North Orange County, California. And oh, by the way, the next year they opened this little business down the street called Disneyland. Yeah, and that didn't hurt to be within 2 miles of that place either. And so Tom realized that what he considered a success was largely about the context that he was in. And he was an incredibly capable and warm and generous guy, and his effectiveness, not just at Burlingame Church, but also back at Princeton, was testament to that. But he really kind of got a wake-up call about what he thought was were his contributions to that church plant. So I guess I want to ask you guys, what has been your experience? What have you told yourself? What have you learned or processed from the experiences in life that you've had so far, or you will have, where you've maybe come to question your decisions, come to question the path that you're on, come to question your sense of call? Because if that hasn't happened for you yet, it will. And if you start a church, there's a good chance that'll happen somewhere in there, like our friend out in the suburb who was absolutely sure that God was calling him to start this new worshiping community, and he got it started and everybody loved him and things were going well, and they were gathering more people, and then circumstances came from outside influences that he couldn't change, he couldn't affect. And now he's feeling like he really maybe made a mistake in the whole thing. He's about to give up. So what have you learned from the times when you've had discouraging or frustrating experiences, or you thought you were having you thought you'd identified a sense of God's call in your life somehow, and then later on you came to the conclusion, maybe I'd misjudged that. Maybe I really didn't understand what was going on there. Maybe I've kind of hit the wall about something. So what has been your experience, or how do you think you would handle that when that time comes in your life and your ministry?
I can go. I was a youth pastor for 4 years before this, and it was like a very rocky journey, like the whole way.
Yeah.
And there were a few times where it got really bad, and like leaders kind of didn't like the direction I had it, and things just got really messy really quick. And that's when I definitely sensed like maybe I'm not supposed to be here. But kind of in retrospect, what I realized most is even if the conflict, like I was on the right side or wrong side, whatever it was, is that I wasn't listening to like the circumstances well enough. I wasn't watching and listening, and if I was able to do that better, I would have had a much clearer understanding of what I was doing and where we were headed and all of that.
Great, that's so helpful. So that's what God taught you through that, was
Yeah.
whether you're on the right side or not, you need to be listening more intently to the people around you,
Yeah.
circumstances.
Yep.
Yeah. That's really helpful, John. Somebody else?
Yes, I can go.
Yeah.
So I've led worship at a couple of different churches,
Mhm.
and something I love doing, something that's been affirmed externally as well as I really feel called to that, does not work for me in churches, and it'll work for a while, and then I've had two places now, one where it just kind of blew up, and the other where I realized kind of late in the game that it wasn't a good fit, and so that's really made me question like why I have this particular desire and skill set, and it seems like the church is the place where that fits,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't seem to fit there, and so I've had to really kind of wrestle with that, and it's kind of led us to what we're doing now, which is ministry, but not so much in a church context.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what you learned from that experience was?
I've learned a lot, similar to John, I think,
Yeah.
the listening bit.
Mhm.
I've learned that it's hard to be a woman leading in the church at times. And I think I've learned that I still love the church. Like, it hasn't made me want to, not be involved. But just that maybe that's not the best fit for me.
Yeah. Well, that's an incredible realization. Is okay, maybe that place, that context, and the context has so much to do with how God uses us, and maybe that context just isn't for you, at least right now.
Yeah.
Thanks, that's really helpful. Somebody else?
I have been a small group leader for quite a long time, and I started with a group of graduate students, and as I get older, it ended up with families. So, and what I learned, I think, is as a leader, I think most of the times, you try to change the context, but it's actually the other way around. The context changes you, and you need to allow that to happen.
Yes.
So I think that was a very important lesson, and also the last 4 years going through seminary, I think it was really important to find out who I am, what my identity is, self-awareness, something I think is so crucial to understand. Actually helps you to understand how the context might be able to change you. So those two things are really, I think, the most two important things I have learned in the past years.
Because if we don't understand who God has made us to be, it's a lot harder to understand what God is calling us to do. Thanks, that's so helpful. One of the things that I learned so clearly was that, and it's still the case, I totally misjudge on a regular basis where God is working and where I spend my time working. The values of the kingdom are just not the values of the world. And over the years, time and time again, when I've been in a situation where I thought I really did great, I really knocked it out of the park, that was my best effort at whatever, it seems like it's amounted to little or nothing. And in other areas where I feel like I have just totally failed, somehow God has managed to bring something out of that. It's kind of to remind me, this is God's show, not mine. Even something as simple as sermons, where somebody, I think I had the best sermon I've ever preached, and there's very little reaction or response to it. And then on the Sunday, I feel like the whole worship service has been a total train wreck. Somebody will come up afterwards and say, "This morning changed my life." Or, I don't know, if you had the experience where somebody has said to you, "I will never forget when you said blah, blah, blah," and you absolutely know you never said that. Whatever it is, you absolutely know you didn't say that, but they heard what God wanted them to hear. Just happened to use you. So that's one thing that has really become clear to me, is that I just totally misjudge regularly where God is at work. Somebody else?
Well, I've experienced a lot of failure trying different things.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, not really failure in the sense of huge disasters, but just like
Yeah.
things not working out,
Things-
things, trying things and then
Right.
not being what I hoped they
Yeah.
would be. So then a lot of that's happened within the context of ministry and church, some other things too. And I guess through that, it's kind of, I would say that what we're doing now, it's allowed me to be less afraid of failure, which I think is really important. And also to have more, at the time it felt like I was a failure, and I felt like I was like losing my ability to do things because of like how frustrating or traumatic the experience
Right.
was.
Yeah.
But like several years later, I feel more able to do things than I was
Of course.
before.
Of course.
So but I don't always feel secure about it. It's more like, like sometimes I feel really sad and like try to figure out, did I make the right decision? I
Sure.
don't think that questioning has gone away, but
Yeah.
I do feel like I've become a more mature and capable person through those experiences.
Absolutely. Well, where do we really learn? Not from success, or whatever that means. What we usually take away from success is the wrong message. Kind of like Tom there in Garden Grove in 1954. Oh, I must be such a great New Testament scholar. That's why everybody's coming to worship on Sunday morning. No, you just happen to be in the best place in the history of America to start a church right now. What we learn from is failure. Oh, gee, I don't want to do that again. Or, gosh, I could have done that a lot better if I had just, whatever. That's what we learn. In our presbytery, we're throwing a whole lot of stuff up on the wall to see what sticks. We got new worshiping communities, we got church plants, NVC was our first one. We've got all kind of projects that we're supporting. A bunch of them will fail. Thing is, we have no clue the difference between the ones that'll make it and the ones that will fail. And even the ones that do fail may be experiences that God uses for far greater things than the ones that we define as success. We just really don't have a clue. But what we're pretty sure is a lot of these efforts aren't going to end up the way we'd hoped. Who knows whether it's what God intends to use them for or not. But it's okay. We're going to learn something. We started out when Nick and I started out with this, and really it was 95% of Nick and me just trying to help out, but we didn't know what we didn't know. Show you how stupid I was. We got our coaching from the guy who was the church planting director for the Evangelical Covenant Church in the Western United States. Wonderful guy. We caught up with him about a year ago, just had lunch with him, Nick and I and a couple friends, just to say thanks for being such a supportive Christian friend. And I remember we were having a lunch. Wayne and I were having lunch, and he said something like, well, now you've learned a whole system. We taught you everything about what we do to start churches. Now, all you got to do is go out and find yourself somebody who wants to start a church. And I said, Wayne, I'm a Presbyterian. I don't know anybody who wants to start a church. Where would I meet them? That was back when folks, it wasn't that long ago really, but it was back when we had nobody like you on our radar. I was thinking I'm going to have to do some kind of road show around the seminaries for about a year to find one person. And he says, well, look, wait, before we finish up here in the restaurant, let's just take a minute to have a word of prayer about that and see what God does with it. We did, and then we went our separate ways. And an hour later, Nick was sitting in my office telling me about his vision for what came to be NVC. And I thought, well, I was really stupid. I just didn't know anything. I didn't even give God credit for what God would want to do through the lives of people like Nick and Whitney and eventually yourselves. But it's through the mistakes that we make that we really learn. And boy, that was my huge lesson was I got very little to do with whatever's going on. And God will even take my mistakes, my misperceptions, and make something great. Somebody else.
So far, I haven't really had many questions on calling.
Okay.
So I think I'm in that category of a pretty smooth road
Yeah.
in a short amount of time. So, yeah, I mean, I just, and I've heard, from a lot of people here and many other places, various church hurts and just different things that have happened. And thankfully, so far that hasn't come my way.
Yeah. All right.
So I'm thankful for that. I'm
Sure,
that will end
absolutely.
At some point.
Absolutely, and at some point that will, if something won't work out that you expect, or something that you count on will just not be there. But yeah.
And there's like lots of mini failures and stuff, but
Oh,
there's nothing
sure.
like that's really like you're asking that question. Have you questioned like, hey, am I supposed to be doing this?
Yeah.
Type of thing? Like that part hasn't come. There's plenty
Yeah.
of little
Okay. All right. Well,
blips, of course.
yeah. We'll go with that sense of call while it's really clear, and Lord willing, it'll be really clear for all of you as you go through this process. How many of you are like leading some kind of worshiping group right now? Okay. And everybody else kind of getting ready to? Thinking about, considering? All right, good. Near and I could tell one of the most critical parts of doing that effectively, and you know this, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, is just having a clear vision. When Nick and I were talking the first time, I mean, literally an hour after I left the guy in the restaurant, one of our colleagues walked down the hall. Actually, it was a secretary, and I'd come back from this meeting at the restaurant and said, "Gee, Linda, now I gotta go out and find somebody who wants to start a church." And she said, "Well, have you talked to the new guy?" I said, "The new guy? Yeah, the guy Nick, the new intern, he wants to start a church." So the secretary obviously knew more than I did about it. And but she came back as we were sitting in my office talking about that. She came back and said, "Well, Nick, do you want to start a mega church?" And he said, "No, absolutely not. No, that's nothing I would ever have any interest in." He says, "What I want to do is I want to start a church that plants other churches." And I thought, that is so cool. Because, he had a picture of that. He had a picture of the people who were here. He had a picture in his mind of you. And it was so clear, and I think it was a God-given vision that here we all are. And I think that makes such a difference to really be as crystal clear as you can. Because, when the experiences do come where you kind of hit the wall, I think that vision will get you through. I made a friend who's a police captain with LAPD. Went to a meeting at the area police station that's near our office. First time I went there was they were having the National Day of Prayer service at the police station. I thought, what's wrong with this picture? Doesn't the ACLU know about these people? And I realized the guy who ran the shop, the captain there, a guy by the name of Todd Chamberlain, is a committed Christian, and he had invited this group that put on the service to come to the police station. I asked Todd one time, I said, okay, so everybody knows what your mission statement is. It's on the side of all those black and white cars, to protect and to serve. It's probably the best known police department mission statement in the world. I said, but what's your vision? He says, here it is. This neighborhood, and he talks about the neighborhood that this division, works in, patrols, whatever. It's about 250,000 people. He says the highest concentration of apartment buildings in the city of LA. A lot of poverty. Most people here are Latin American immigrants. And he says many of those folks come from countries where the perception of the police is everything you would never want it to be in our line of work. He said, a lot of these people come from places where the police are part of death squads. They're the kind of people who knock on the door at midnight and they take away your brother and you never see him again. They're the kind of people who beat you up or beat up your dad or extort money from you because they're corrupt, they're on the take. And he says, my vision is that one of these days, some mom who's come from some Latin American country who's holding the hand of her little child, she'll point to one of our people, one of those people in uniform or getting out of one of our patrol cars, and she'll say in Spanish, honey, if you and I ever get separated, if you get scared, if you're afraid of what's going to happen to you, you find one of the people who's dressed like that or drives around in a car that looks like that, and they will protect you, and they will bring you home to me safely. He said, that's my vision for the kind of relationship that we would have with these people. Now, Todd's been on LAPD's SWAT team. He's a guy who can take care of business. But that vision. I was just knocked out. I was expecting some kind of bureaucraties sort of statement and everything that he picked up from some meeting with some consultant that got forced on that they had to work with. He said, no. And what I want is for these people out here to realize that we really do work for them. And I thought, wow, what a great goal to work toward. And he said, that gets me through when everything else goes wrong. First time I met the guy, he had came into a community meeting actually, and he said, I get at these community meetings, he gives a little report about what's happening in the area that they he said, this was our worst weekend that we've ever had here. We had 3 murders in our area. He said, and he said, and the terrible thing was, one of them was right in the parking lot next door to our station. And he just kind of buried his head in his hands. He worked so hard to keep this kind of thing from happening. And, I got 3 call-outs in one weekend, and one of them's just 50 feet on the other side of my office. I thought, wow, that's really interesting. That's a guy I got to get to know, because he's so different from the usual impression that some of those people convey. And what I realized was that he had this incredible vision that kept him going in the face of times like that, when it seems like all your effort has accomplished nothing. And I think that, and that's been a good lesson for me, and I think that makes such a difference. If you're starting any venture, whether it's a church or a business or a school or whatever it might be, if you're as clear as you possibly can be, just like Nick was. I want to start a church. I don't want to start a church that gets big. I want to start a church that starts other churches. And what do you guys had here? Is it 5 or 6 spin-off church plants, Andrew? What?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Around there. That's 5 or 6.
I think it's been 6 because I know the first one failed because we were really so sold on this guy, and he had a great concept. He worked in I think it was 24-hour fitness overnight. And he kind of collected people who came in. He was working the front desk, and he got to know these people, and they started a new worshiping community, and it was great. And then he one day up and ran off to the Midwest chasing some woman, and the church became a drinking club, as I recall. But anyway.
Those fitness people there.
Yeah, those yeah. They run off to the Midwest, yes.
Seem trustworthy, but.
Yeah, seem trustworthy, but you gotta watch them all the time. But, Nick said, we learned so much from that. I learned that I really needed to be coaching much more intently and much more engaged. As I recall, have you all taken that, anybody taken that Gallup SRI church planter assessment thing online? Okay, this guy took it. It's they take like 250 people who've been effective in starting new churches, and they put them through a survey, and then you take the same questions, and they kind of compare your scores with theirs. And this guy blew that thing away, and he was the highest I think anybody'd ever seen. So we just assumed that naturally he would have all these innate skills for it. But probably what happened is somewhere along the line, he kind of hit the wall in his work and his ministry, and we just didn't know it. And Nick said, hey, that's what I learned, is I got to be much more engaged with somebody like that. And he's done that since. And I think there's like 5 now that are still going, which is huge. I mean, I don't know if there's any church in our denomination right now. Now there's some old ones, First Church Seattle, but in terms of anything in the last 20 or 30 years, I'm not sure there's any church that has begun more worshiping groups or other churches than NVC. So as you think about your experience in this or your future experience in this, what are the areas you're concerned about? You must think at some point, gee, I really hope I can learn more in this area or do better in that area, or hope I can avoid this. What are some of the areas that you have some concerns about and you'd like to be able to deal with effectively?
I know for us, like my wife and I have I think a very clear vision of what we want or what we'd like to see, and we've even talked with Nick about this. The end goal I think is really has become crystallized for us, but it's the little steps getting there, kind of, and so and just that kind of trying to do something a little new without a lot of kind of either models out there or experiences to draw from, but wanting to kind of be able to hold fast to that vision. But I think it's those kind of little steps, and then how to navigate if those little steps change that kind of end goal, and how do we become comfortable with that, but also kind of committed to, I think, that vision, in a sense of saying, like, this is the path we want to head, and we can take a lot of paths to get there, but we still want to make sure that our destination is clear. But then also being able to say, like, the destination may also change a little bit, and kind of that, where those boundaries lie of like, how flexible on that vision are we, but then also how committed are we to kind of staying the course, even as it gets difficult.
Sure. So keeping a clear vision and keeping to that, but being willing to adapt to whatever it takes to pursue it. Great. What about some of the rest of you? What are you looking at? Out in the months, years ahead.
I think we're still trying to figure out location.
Mm-hmm.
So we've told them no. I mean, we go to Kansas City tomorrow or tonight. Sorry.
Ah.
Because she's from Missouri. I'm
Okay.
from California, so we're still working through
Oh yeah.
kind of who we're trying to reach.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Well, Lord willing, that'll become really clear. That, yeah, and I'm sure that's not an easy thing. We wrestle with that with our established churches, and as I'm sure you know, there's been a real sea change in the experience of established churches where they were just used to people coming to find them. And now they've got to figure out, who is it we're called to go out there and reach? Yeah. Lord bless you on figuring that out.
Thanks.
How many of you are, where are you guys from, by the way?
From Mission Viejo, California.
Okay, but local, but going
Mhm.
Midwest. Yeah. How about some of the rest of you? Guys,
San Diego. San
mostly
Diego.
Southern Cal?
Yeah, San Diego.
Very good.
We're from Michigan, but we're looking
Yeah.
at planting out here.
Uh-huh.
Really, so.
We're from Louisiana, but
Ah.
we're planting here.
Very good.
North Carolina,
Mm-hmm.
working.
So you guys are really from all over the place. Wow. Terrific. Well, I admire you coming all the way out to be a part of this. I hope it's been a good experience. I trust that it has. Who have you had in to meet with you so far? Just out of curiosity.
Scott Sunquist,
Scott?
Bob Lillian,
Yeah.
Josh
Josh
Schmidt,
Mm-hmm.
Craig.
Craig? Yeah.
Mark
Mark Branson. Yeah. Okay. Very good. Yeah.
I know one thing that I've heard a lot, and I think we're dealing with, but I think a lot of us are dealing with, is a good number of us are couples, and there's the reality of like couples wanting to do ministry together, but the financial viability of that, and not a lot of like, there's not a lot of like examples of it out in the field, and I think as well as like whether it's actually sustainable or not to both be in ministry. And I think like we feel very called to do something together, but also realize that it's going to be really hard to financially afford to do that, and to both do it.
Yeah.
And I know other couples have talked about that, of just the reality of finances, and especially if you want to do it in Southern California where it's so cheap to live.
Yeah. They're like they're giving away housing.
Yeah,
all the time.
$100 rent.
$100,
Yeah. So I mean, and so it's like we love California, but man, it would be a lot more feasible to plant together in the Midwest.
Sure. Is there a message there
Yeah.
somewhere?
So we're going to Missouri with them now.
Yeah, all right, very good.
But I mean, I think that is a really scary.
Yeah, sure is.
And I think it's one of those things that we feel like it is I don't know if I'd say it's a burden on our call, but it's a test to our call.
Yeah,
Because
sure
it's
it is.
very easy to say like, we want to follow God's call, but we also want to pay our rent, you know. And seminary degrees cost money, and
Oh, yeah.
apparently the government wants that money back at some point. So.
Sadly, yes, I'm told, yeah. Yeah, you know, and I feel so bad for, I know what, seminary financial situations you've been in. Those of you who know something about Fuller know that there's very little financial aid. I'm not telling you anything. And, my experience from some decades ago was that you could finish and not really owe anything. I mean, if you hustled and worked, and now, it's such a different environment. I really feel for you. And yet, I have to believe that God will work that out if you're doing what God wants you to do. I was having lunch yesterday with a pastor of a sizable and prestigious church who's just retired, and said I had no idea what we were going to do for housing because he needs to stay in the area. Somebody from the church came up with a solution. He said, never saw that coming. Just never saw that coming. But we're trying to be faithful to what God wanted us to do, and I guess he said, I guess that's a message that we were at least on the right track. And he said, I couldn't have provided that. So I have to believe that somewhere out there are solutions to these things, but boy, it's a bigger challenge than some of us have had to face, and I admire you being willing to take on those challenges and just trust God through them. Just out of curiosity, what's the most exciting thing that you've found? As you've been here and you've met with some of these folks, and anything really kind of struck you that has caused you to think, wow, that brings some new excitement to this concept, this idea?
Yeah, you talk about vision, and I think it's like putting a puzzle together.
Mm-hmm.
So you had over the last couple of years puzzle pieces, sort of, but you hadn't really the whole picture, and it seems like a whole picture is coming together. So I thought that was really exciting, even though I don't have anything to show, but I have I think a pretty clear vision of what I'm supposed to do. So that was really exciting because it took a long time for me. I don't know for others, but I speak for myself. This took like 4 years.
Wow. Yeah.
And at the end it was accelerating, but the beginning was quite slow.
Sure.
So now I guess I want to see if the vision really comes into reality, and it's something else that is exciting, I think.
Well, God bless you for your faithfulness through a number of years. And I really believe we came back from the General Assembly, and a fair number of people in our presbytery were not happy with some of the decisions that were made at our recent GA. But I had to tell them, I think there's a sense in which our denomination is both dying and being reborn at the same time. And the old way of doing things is in many respects going away. And to me, this is the best part of my job, is meeting folks like yourselves, because this is the part where I see the Church of Jesus Christ being reborn. And that's what God does. Bring about resurrection. I think this is a fabulous, at least opportunity for me to get a chance to meet with you guys. Have you done have you done field trips? Have you gone to worship in various churches around here? Is that part of what you guys do, or have you just done some of that on your own?
Yeah, not as part of our pro work stuff, but we lived in
Just-
Pasadena for a while, so
Yeah, okay, sure.
different churches.
Yeah.
We visited at least 20.
Yeah, okay, all right, so you've done the road show at least.
These guys have been going to a different church every week in addition to NBC.
Actually.
Yeah, good. What are you noticing as you're out there? Who's doing good worship? Who's doing good ministry?
Well, it's funny, Chris. We went to another church this past Sunday, and it was great. There were a lot of things to like about it, but on the drive home, we said, okay,
No, go ahead, you've already said
She said, maybe
This
we
looks
do need
really
to.
bad.
No, it's okay. It's good humor. She said, we keep going to these church services, and we see a lot of good things we like, but we can't find something that we like everything about. So maybe we do need to plant a church. Just like, it's just one of those things you start to see. We all have those
Sure,
preferences. and things we
absolutely.
like and we're working towards.
Absolutely.
And but there's part of that creative process about birthing a new culture, liturgy. I mean, there is part of
Sure.
it that's not a arrogant thing. It's not just like, we have this vision, this
No.
hope, this desire
Right.
to see certain things happening.
If
we're
God has
working
given you
together
that
and such.
vision, then that's
Yeah.
that's a niche in there that needs to be filled.
Definitely. That's a big drive for us. I mean, there's not a church here that we know that looks like the one we want
Yeah.
to be a part of.
Yeah.
I think it's a huge need.
I think, but after I said that, what Morgan said was so good, and it was really healthy, because what he said is something like, well, just be careful, if we do plant a church and, it's something that we really like, not to make it into an idol, where it's this is the best thing ever,
Right.
We're going to
Like-
create systems we don't like.
Yeah, there's always gonna be stuff we don't like, so.
Sure, absolutely. That's such a great point. Where we see this in working with our existing churches is when a congregation declines in numbers and increases in age. And there are ways that a declining, aging church, which basically is, in kind of a hospice type ministry, can really still have a great impact. And yet so often there is this great desire, understandable desire, to hang on to the facilities, to hang on to the building, the property, the campus. I guess I'm weird in that I've never felt that. My home church is Bel Air Press, and a few years back we did a big, $20-25 million renovation. The place looks great and everything. But if an earthquake knocked it all down tomorrow, it wouldn't be any less a church. It was all gone. And yet I do realize that there's a kind of a generational difference for some folks where the location and the property is so important. And I've done my share of swinging and a hammer and building stuff in various churches. And yet if it had to go away, it'd be all right. This will have to go away. I think I know who that is. I'll back later. But that's where we see a real I think a stumbling block to what God could do next if we just kind of release some of our grip on some things that are precious to us, but may not be as important in the long run for the ministry of Christ. That's some of the rest of you. There's some great answers, by
I was going to share something from the last question you had asked, just
Mhm.
about getting what we're getting out of this and stuff. For me, just a big picture, not any one little thing that someone
Mhm.
said. I've been just real encouraged just by the collaboration here, and that Nick has been so generous to pour into us, and just that.
Isn't he a great guy?
Yeah, and just the spirit of we want to help other people with no strings attached. I don't get the feeling that Nick wants to get something out of us or something back
Exactly.
on this. And I think that from the beginning, that's been very encouraging. And I think for Jan and I, that's actually big for us, and also a vision we have, and we don't see other people doing that. And so just to be able to see a church and a team that has a vision for helping other people get started and helping figure out how to get started without the strings that usually come
Right,
attached. It's been
exactly.
huge for us, and I think an example of how we want to do ministry, not just around church planning, but all kinds of things, just no strings, just freely receive, we freely give. And
Yeah.
that's, I think, a huge lesson that no one said that in any one meeting, but just the overall picture
You
is
pick
huge.
it up.
Yeah.
That's the kind of people we want to be, and I give a lot of credit to Nick for being that kind of guy. But it is also reflective of the fact that we learned the model. It's not the only one we use now, but we learned the model that got this ministry started from another denomination, and they poured thousands of dollars of time and consulting and resources into us, because, like I said, we didn't know what we didn't know. We were so dead in the water that as a presbytery, really in many ways as a denomination, that we were just lost. And so these folks, the evangelical covenant folks, came alongside us and said, hey, we'll help you. You can be in our program. You can come to our seminars. We'll teach you what we know. It's not the only way to do this, but we'll teach you everything we know, and no charge. Just, it's for Jesus Christ. Why would we send you a bill? And that's the kind of people we want to be. Several times I've met with church planter types who kind of, I think they found it a relief when we've said, yeah, we poured some money into you, but we don't own you. We don't own the vision that God has given you. If you need to be someplace else, in some other presbytery or some other denomination or some other configuration, it's not like you cheated us out of anything. If you're doing the Lord's will, that's what we're here for. And I hope that would be one thing that everybody who's been a part of a experience like this would take with you, and do that for somebody else. And because we benefited greatly from people who knew a lot more than we did, who were happy to share what they'd learned for the sake of Christ. So go forth and do likewise. One thing I remember long time ago, I was having lunch with Rick Warren down when he had his office in Mission Viejo on Alicia Parkway. I went to lunch, and they were running 4,000 at the time. And I said, so why do you think this congregation has grown so quickly? And I expected him, frankly, I expected him to say what Tom Gillespie told himself. Well, it's because I'm such a great preacher. Or I came up with this idea for a 40-day campaign, and it's made a difference. He said, because God sent us the most unselfish group of people that I have ever met. Every time they got used to some place or some routine or something that seemed of value to them, and those of us who were the leaders had to say, we need to take that away now for the sake of reaching other people. They said, go ahead. We'll give up what has seemed important to us but really isn't, for the sake of reaching others with the gospel. I don't know if you can engineer that. I never could. But, later on, years later, when I got to know some people at Saddleback Church, I realized he was absolutely right. Those are the most unselfish people I had ever met. They would do anything for you. Again, the same kind of attitude was, you're in a different denomination, so what? You're in a different county, doesn't matter to us. What can we do to help you? Our experience, for whatever it's worth, is free to you. Resources here, take them, they're free. And I would say, if you can develop, if you can figure out how to develop that kind of culture, God will use that among your folks to change the world. And I don't know how to do it because I'm sure I'm possessive in my own way all too often. I know those of us and spent most of our, because I've never planted a church. I don't know, you guys know a lot more about this than I ever will. I kind of get it secondhand from Nick and all these other people. But boy, if you could foster that kind of culture that says whatever we can do for you. We're having a meeting Sunday afternoon with another church planting group that operates. Are you going to have Jim Milley come in? Okay, so anyway, Jim will tell you about Bridges, and this is a Bridges meeting. And one of the guys, actually it was a guy who was here last year, Corey Marquez, who has a ministry in Pasadena. And they do dollar for dollar mission and self-support. And we're working with Corey to try to pump a few extra bucks into their project. But just the fact that they are so generous that 50% of what comes in the offering plate goes out into mission projects, and they don't have any committee or something that vets all this stuff. You know, somebody needs some money, well, here's the offering plate. And take what you need out of it. Give it to them. Boy, that kind of attitude just, I mean, people are so knocked out by that. And I have great admiration for Corey and the folks who are with them at New Abbey, which came right out of NBC. Anything else we need to cover? That's not just all I know, that's really more than I know. But anyway, just a real joy to be with you guys. Lord bless you as you seek God's direction for your ministry, wherever that may be. If you end up, putting a shameless plug here, if you end up staying in Southern California and you want to connect with some people who sort of like what you're doing, give us a call at San Fernando Presbytery. We'd be happy to talk to you. Yeah, I probably don't have enough cards, but anyway, copy that. But like I say, if you're staying in the area and you want to talk to some folks about where you feel led to go in ministry, give us a call. We might not be the people you ought to be connected with, but we might know somebody you should be. Somebody in another presbytery, somebody in another denomination. Like I said, we think the world of the Evangelical Covenant folks. They've been very good to us, and we think they have a wonderful approach. It's not the only one to use, but it's the one we used to get this ministry started, and seems to have worked. Anyway, thank you guys. Great to be with you, and thank all of you in the other group in the East, and God bless all of you there working with Shannon, who are seeking the Lord's will in new ministries, wherever you are. God bless you.